Hey everybody, Big Toad here. Welcome again to my studio. We're going to continue to work on this big 6 by 3 foot painting of an Idaho butte and some foothills. And I did a little bit more work on the sagebrush, which I showed you zoomed in there at the beginning. Now I'm going to work on some of the background, or I should say mid-ground trees I'm going to put on the distant hill. And these trees, I'm going to use many of the same colors I used on the previous video for the foreground trees. Although I'm going to settle, like I've explained in the past, more to the middle. The lights are not as brilliant or as high a chroma as the foreground when you get to the midground, and the darks are not as dark as the foreground in the midground. So I'm going to bring that more towards the middle from both ends of the spectrum to put in some of these trees here. Using some of the same technique. I've got except I'm using a round brush here. I think about a size 6, and just bringing in some colors, tapping them in with the side of the brush. Not doing strokes so much because I want to keep these soft, because it is in the distance. So I want to keep the edges soft. So I'm working very lightly on these. So about today's palette. Two blues, ultramarine blue and cobalt blue. Ultramarine blue being a blue that leans more towards, a little bit towards the reds. You've got a bit of so it's a little darker, incorporating the reds, and the cobalt blue, which is a more natural or straight blue. Then I have 4 yellows: yellow ochre, Naples yellow, cad yellow light, cad yellow medium. This being a very yellow based painting, I chose to use 4 yellows, introducing the new yellow, like I've explained in the past, the Naples yellow, which I really like for the Idaho landscapes. So these mid-ground trees will create depth because obviously they are much smaller than the foreground tree that's right next to it here on the left. And you want to find ways to create logical depth within your painting so that the viewer instinctively knows what's in the foreground or what's in the midground or further away. And that's what I'm getting out of these mid-ground trees I'm putting in now. So I do decide to add in just a little bit of darker color to these. You want to be careful, like I've explained. You don't want the darks to be too darks or the lights to be too brilliant or too high a chroma. I made a compositional error right here. I'm bringing these background trees too close to the foreground trees. And it was brought to my attention by somebody stopping in my studio that the midground trees I'm painting in, because they're so close to the foreground, it was confusing about whether it was just an extension of a goofy looking extension of the foreground tree, or was it actually some distant trees in the midground. So I ended up having to scrape off some of the paint and create more of a separation between the foreground tree and the mid-ground trees I was painting. Now, to continue the idea of depth, I create another clump of trees further back in the distance in the midground. There's actually 2 layers of midground in this painting, and they're represented by these 2 clumps of trees. And so creating that distance and separation and perspective is important to create the illusion within the painting of rolling hills fading off into the distance to the base of this butte or mountain. And as I was explaining, with atmospheric perspective, the further an object is, the more the colors kind of bleed together towards the center, as far as the darks get lighter and the high chroma get duller, and also the edges get fuzzy. So creating, again, more depth through atmospheric perspective and normal size perspective. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I made the mistake of bringing the clump of trees too close to the foreground tree. So you see I scraped off some of that color, which I don't scrape off color very often, but I felt like I needed to in order to maintain the integrity of the midground. And when I use the word integrity here, I mean that I don't want heavy paint in the midground except on the trees that I just put in. So I scraped off the extra paint and then have gone back in with some of my yellows to correct the midground and add some color to it. I still need to create separation again between those two layers of the midground. Where the first clump of tree and the second clump of tree, that's actually a ridge line and it's difficult to see. So I will be reestablishing that, bringing in some little higher chroma colors on the closer midground hill that I'm working on there. Contrast is key to making that separation, and you can make contrast with chroma, like I just said. I'm going to use a little higher chroma to separate the colors in the midground parts, the furthest midground and the closer midground. You can also use basically just two different colors. Obviously, you can create separation by changing the colors, so one is different than the other. And you can use values of darker colors against lighter shades. So I could use a darker shade of yellow in front and a lighter shade of yellow in the back and create contrast and separation. So but in this case, I'm going to bring a slightly higher chroma just to the top of the ridge line, and it's going to help establish that separation between the two mid-ground layers there. And you can see I'm working a little bit on that now. I'll have to just continue to look at this over time as I work on it to see if I've got enough separation or not between them. Sometimes that can be difficult, especially when you're using, when your layers of midground are so close together in color. And I've done some more work on the sagebrush, as you can tell. I made it a lot taller and going to bring in some light highlights. Yet still more to do on the sagebrush. I started working on some of the foreground grasses along the fence and along the road here. You can see next to this foreground tree on the left. I used, again, some of the same colors I used in the tree, and careful to maintain contrast between the tree and the grasses. It's okay if there's a little bit of lost edge there, but not too much. I'm using a size 6 round brush here, laying it on its side and flicking upwards to get the illusion of grass. And you can see I move forward with that as well, put in some lighter grass along the road, moving up the hill, trying to create that illusion that there's a hill rising from the road up higher towards the fence and a little bit beyond that where the tree is. So I still have a lot of work to do with grasses in this painting. But here's a kind of look of what I've done today. Put the grass in. I put in a little sagebrush there as well, in front of those grasses in the foreground. I did a little touch-ups on the trees in the foreground, and obviously I put in those distant mid-ground trees to create depth. I still have more mid-ground trees to put in. I still have a lot of grass to do along the fence row. And so there's a lot of work yet to be done. Making progress though. So thank you for watching. And if you watch all the way to the end, I appreciate it. Until next time, this is the Big Toad and I am out.